Mother's Day is a time to celebrate the women who have sacrificed, loved, and cared for others. This year, we want to honor the millions of moms who embody these values yet never got a chance to meet their children. Miscarriage is still, sadly, a taboo topic. Dr. Jessica Zucker, a psychologist who specializes in reproductive health, says this silence has made many women feel isolated and shamed, weighed down by a societal stigma.
Not talking about this more openly makes people think maybe something is wrong with me. And the research shows that a majority of women are actually blaming themselves in the aftermath of loss, feeling a sense of guilt and shame. And so this is incredibly problematic.
Especially since it's the most common form of pregnancy loss. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists estimates that nearly 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in a miscarriage. So why aren't we talking about it? Zucker says there's been a shift over the last decade towards more women opening up, but the topic continues to be overshadowed by stigma.
It really comes back to the fact that culturally we're uncomfortable talking about hard things. We are particularly uncomfortable talking about grief, and we are super uncomfortable wading into the topic of pregnancy loss because it's so muddled and it is so unique.
Every woman's experience is different, but one common thread is that many of them may have never even talked about it before. Wendy Dwyer had her first conversation about pregnancy loss in her mid-20s, after she had already had her first son.
I've never discussed it with anyone until I think when I was talking with my husband's mom, and I found out that she'd had a couple of stillbirths, and that was a shock because nobody had ever talked about it before.
Dwyer is a mother of 8. While her first 5 pregnancies were all successful, she worried number 6 would be a different story.
So I'm kind of a numbers person, and I knew statistically speaking, I'd been very, very lucky that I'd never had a loss. And at that point, I had had some friends who had had losses, most of them very early. And I knew statistically you were going to have a loss 1 out of every 5 times, I think is what it was. I wasn't telling anybody I was pregnant. I didn't really want to talk about it too much because it just didn't seem like I could be that lucky to not have one.
Miscarriage is defined as pregnancy loss before 20 weeks, with most occurring before the 12th week. Zucker says that because of this, many health professionals encourage women to wait to share their pregnancy news until they've reached the 2nd trimester.
So this kind of sets up this interesting hush-hush, let's be quiet about early pregnancy. To me, that means don't share your good news initially in case it becomes bad news. So in my mind, that actually sets up this sort of complicated situation for people. It kind of robs people of receiving the support they might need.
Since Dwyer was cautiously navigating the first few weeks of her pregnancy, she hadn't told anyone, including her young children. But then, at the 8-week checkup, the improbable happened. Her baby had a heartbeat.
I was like, oh my gosh, all right, this is happening. Okay, I can relax. I told all the kids, we told people. I didn't worry at all anymore. I just started living life and things were progressing nicely. And it was just kind of a good pregnancy and I could relax and I could breathe. And I went to that 12-week appointment and I didn't bring my husband because I didn't think there was any need. And I usually go alone, but this time I went with a friend. And I was just kind of completely shocked that there was no heartbeat because that just didn't make sense.
After an early pregnancy loss, women can choose to have a dilation and curettage procedure, which surgically removes the fetus, or a natural miscarriage. Dwyer decided to go the natural route, wanting the chance to see and hold her baby. She was 14 weeks pregnant when she felt a pop in the middle of the night.
I didn't expect a water to break. Like I knew that was the reality of your body, but it just seemed so weird. And so I rushed to the bathroom and I locked the door because I didn't want anyone to come in on me. I didn't want the kids to wake up. I didn't want my husband to wake up. And I was so worried that everything was just going to be scary and messy.
All of Dwyer's previous pregnancies had been induced, so this was her first time experiencing labor.
More and more clots were coming out, and that was kind of scary. But then eventually the baby did come out. And I was able to see her. She was so tiny. She could fit in the palm of my hand. But she had little arms, little legs and feet, and this little head. And it was amazing to see her But then things weren't over yet, and I started to get in a little bit more pain and more blood, and I was kind of scared, but I was still trying to clean up and keep everything out of everybody else's way. It was all about everybody else.
Still experiencing heavy cramps, Dwyer cleaned up all the blood and started a load of laundry before jumping into the shower. By the time her husband woke up, she had lost a lot of blood and was on the brink of passing out. They called their doctor, who sent them straight to the emergency room. After a long night of labor that ended in dangerous blood loss and immense grief, she still had to go home and be a mom to her other children. Dwyer has made it a point to talk about her miscarriage with her kids, which Zucker believes is a crucial part of normalizing early pregnancy loss. In fact, Zucker has spoken with her 9-year-old daughter about her own experience with miscarriage.
My hope in sharing with her is for her to just know, oh, that's a possibility. These things happen. And that when I talk about it with her, I'm not whispering and I'm not telling her to not tell anybody. This isn't a secret. And I don't think anything is wrong with me or my body. And so my hope is that that trickles down and she would feel the same way if she hears about somebody going through it or if she herself goes through it in the future.
Zucker lost her baby at 16 weeks. She had noticed some spotting, but her doctor had checked and said everything still looked good. 2 days later, Zucker had a natural miscarriage alone at home.
And I had to cut the umbilical cord myself. Like, my situation was so gory and traumatic and unusual. And so in some ways, I became my patient's biggest fear. And in other situations, in other cases, I became, I think, this person who actually understood them in a way that they weren't sure if I did before, maybe.
Zucker dedicated part of her career to helping women work through their pregnancy losses. But suddenly she was in her patient's position, overwhelmed with emotion.
When I had my loss, I was astounded that I was suddenly feeling, that the hormonal shift brought about so many complicated feelings for me. And I felt so alone despite knowing I wasn't. I was sort of just suddenly brought back into so many crushing sessions where women were talking about how alone they felt, how isolated they felt, how alienated they felt. And so I turned to the literature, and that's when I found that the research finds that most people blame themselves. Most people feel a sense of shame. A lot of people feel like they need to be quiet about this. I was angry, and I was also just taken aback. Like, what? How is it possible that in this pivotal moment in our lives, in our reproductive lives, in our family lives, that we feel badly about ourselves? It made no sense to me.
It was then that Zucker decided to become more vocal about her story. She started a campaign which led to writing her recent book, I Had a Miscarriage, a Memoir, a Movement.
My aim is to help people feel like they did nothing wrong, and in a genuine inside out sort of way, not just like, oh, you're not alone. We hear that in so many contexts these days, which is helpful, hopefully, but I want people to feel that. I know I'm not alone because so-and-so talked about her loss and so talked about theirs, and because I've heard it all over the place.
This type of support really helped Dwyer through her own journey. Once she began talking about her miscarriage, many of her friends began to speak about their experiences too, both in person and online.
There was a mom at church who had started a Facebook group, and she had put it out there, and she invited me in. And that was a wonderful space to be, because she had actually lost her son at 25 weeks, I think, and she wanted to help other moms. And never did I ever get this attitude of, oh, well, your baby was only 10 weeks, so it doesn't matter. And that was so nice, because that's kind of what I was getting from other people. Like, 10 weeks, what's the big deal? It's like 10 weeks was something to me. That's a long time. It made my baby real and not just some story that I could tell. Like, they honored her name. They honored who she was. And there was just a lot of real sharing. And then just, the ins and outs of what's going to happen to my body and how are things going to be. They were just very honest and clear.
Zucker says that by censoring conversations around miscarriage, we're placing an expectation on these women to immediately bounce back to normal.
And that is a completely asinine expectation. We have to take time. So one person can lose a pregnancy at 6 weeks and grieve for 6 years. Another woman could lose a pregnancy at 6 weeks and be back to trying to conceive 6 weeks. Be gentle with yourself. Society isn't. So we have to aim to be gentle with ourselves. This is what we would want to model for our offspring. And you did nothing wrong. You absolutely did nothing to deserve this loss.
And while having open conversations about loss is the goal, Zucker says not everyone needs to feel obligated to speak about their experience. But by normalizing the topic, each woman has the opportunity to deal with their miscarriage how they want and need without the presence of societal pressure, influence, or stigma.
Pregnancy loss is not a disease. There's no doctor sort of working on a cure. It's not like this is ever going to go away. And so the sooner we get more, comfortable talking about this, the sooner we embrace this as a normative outcome of pregnancy, the sooner we can commune around it. So no one should feel isolated. No one should feel alone.
And so this Mother's Day, we're starting the conversation in hopes that you'll continue it in your own lives. You can find more information about Dr. Jessica Zucker, Wendy Dwyer, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
When I asked researchers, why aren't you studying women? Like, what's going on here? Most often the answer is that it's because of the menstrual cycle.
Why are male bodies the standard for medical research?
Then switching kids to plant-based whole foods for good health.
In the world of getting children to eat vegetables, just keep putting more vegetables on their plate. Don't give up. Don't cave in. If they say, but I only want chicken nuggets, don't believe them.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
We're told every day, mostly on the internet, that you can't pronounce the name of a chemical. It must automatically be bad for you.
What does the long list of ingredients truly mean? Then,
was there a time when you really needed me and I didn't come because I was working?
Taking time this Mother's Day to recognize the many challenges of motherhood. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.